"You don't belong in this seat. Security, get him out." The words sliced through the hushed luxury of the first-class cabin like a blade through silk. Victoria Hammond's voice carried that particular frequency of entitlement that made flight attendants snap to attention and other passengers look away in embarrassment. She stood in the aisle of Apex Airways Flight 447, her manicured finger pointing directly at the black man, sitting calmly in seat 1A. The man didn't flinch, he didn't argue. He simply looked up from his tablet with eyes that held a depth of intelligence most people missed when they saw his casual clothes: dark gray hoodie, black jeans, white sneakers. To Victoria Hammond, he was exactly what she expected to find sitting where he didn't belong. What she didn't know was that 3 hours earlier in a boardroom 30 floors above downtown Chicago, that same man had signed documents making him the owner of the entire airline. Every seat, every plane, every employee who was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The humiliation was about to begin. But not for the person, Victoria thought. Before we dive into this story of instant karma that left an entire airport frozen in shock, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of how they look, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Stories like this need to be heard. Now let's step aboard Apex Airways Flight 447, where judgment, prejudice, and power were about to collide at 35,000 feet. The man in seat 1A was Marcus Rivera, though the nameplate on his hoodie didn't announce his wealth. At 44, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing and knew exactly what he was worth. His broad shoulders and athletic build hinted at his college basketball days at Northwestern, but it was his eyes that told the real story: sharp, calculating, patient. Marcus was the founder and CEO of Rivera Capital Group, a private equity firm that had grown from a tiny Chicago office to a global powerhouse worth $8.2 billion. His investment strategy was simple: find undervalued companies, fix their problems, and turn them into industry leaders. He had done it with hotels, restaurants, and shipping companies. Today, he was about to do it with airlines. That morning, in a closed-door meeting that had taken 6 months to negotiate, Marcus had acquired a controlling stake in Apex Airways. The ink on the contracts was barely dry. The press release was scheduled for Monday. But Marcus believed in seeing his investments up close, which was why he was sitting in first class wearing clothes that cost less than the champagne service, observing how his new employees treated their customers when they thought no one important was watching. He had specifically chosen to fly incognito. No corporate entourage, no designer suit, no flashy watch. Just a man who looked like he might have saved up for months to afford a first-class seat, which was exactly how Victoria Hammond saw him. Marcus remembered another flight, 21 years ago. Fresh out of business school with his MBA, wearing his best suit for his first major client meeting. He had saved for months to buy that first-class ticket, wanting to arrive fresh and confident. But the flight attendant had looked at him and said, "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? This section is very expensive." She had made him show his ticket 3 times, questioned his credit card, and suggested he might be more comfortable in economy. That night, lying in his hotel room, Marcus had made a promise to himself. No one would ever question where he belonged again. Every company he built, every deal he closed, every billion he earned, was partly motivated by that moment of powerlessness. Today, he was about to discover that his new airline had the same problem. Flight 447 was Apex Airways' flagship route Chicago O'Hare to Miami International. The first-class cabin smelled of leather and expensive air freshener with 14 seats arranged in 7 rows of spacious luxury. Seat 1A was the crown jewel, a window seat with extra legroom and the best view during takeoff. It was 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. The cabin was filling with the usual mix of business travelers and wealthy vacationers. Most were white, most were well-dressed. Most assumed they belonged exactly where they were sitting. Victoria Hammond was not most people. At 52, she was pharmaceutical heiress who had inherited more money than she had ever earned. Her platinum elite status with Apex Airways was a badge of honor she wore like armor. She always flew first class. She always demanded seat 1A, and she always got what she wanted. Today, she was dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight chignon, and her sunglasses remained perched on her head despite being indoors. Everything about her screamed money and status, which she assumed gave her the right to govern the skies. Behind her stood her husband, Gregory Hammond, a soft-spoken man who had learned years ago that disagreeing with Victoria in public was a losing battle. He carried her Louis Vuitton carry-on and wore the expression of someone who wished he was anywhere else. The flight attendant approaching the situation was Jessica Martinez, 29 years old, and eager to please the airline's most valued customers. Jessica had been working for Apex Airways for 4 years, and she knew that keeping Platinum Elite passengers happy was the key to good performance reviews. She had already bypassed Marcus twice during pre-flight service, offering champagne and warm nuts to the passengers in 2A and 2B while pretending not to see his raised hand. In the cockpit, Captain Ryan Mitchell was completing his pre-flight checklist. At 48, Mitchell was an old-school pilot with 25 years of experience and strong opinions about how his cabin should be run. He had built his reputation on running a tight ship and maintaining order, which often meant siding with passengers who looked like they belonged in first class over those who didn't. His co-pilot, David Park, was reviewing weather reports and trying to ignore the tension he could feel building in the cabin behind them. As Marcus watched Victoria approach with fire in her eyes, his mind drifted back to that flight 21 years ago. American Airlines Flight 1247, Chicago to New York. He had been 23 years old, carrying his brand-new MBA and a head full of dreams. The flight attendant's name had been Carol, and her smile had been as fake as her concern. "Sweetheart," she had said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "are you sure you're in the right section? Coach is back that way." She had pointed toward the economy cabin like she was directing him to the servants' quarters. Marcus had shown her his boarding pass. She had scrutinized it like it might be counterfeit. "Well, how did you afford this?" she had asked, not even trying to hide her skepticism. "Did someone buy this for you?" The humiliation had burned in his chest like acid. Other passengers had stared. Some had whispered. A few had looked sympathetic but said nothing. Marcus had been forced to show his ID, his credit card, and his student loan documentation before Carol had reluctantly allowed him to take his seat. But the damage was done. For the entire 5-hour flight, he had felt the weight of everyone's judgment. The message was clear. You don't belong here. People like you don't sit in seats like this. That night, Marcus had called his mother from his hotel room in Manhattan. "Mom," he had said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. I'm going to build something so big that nobody will ever question where I belong again." His mother had been quiet for a long moment. Then she had said, "Baby, the best revenge is success. But the best justice is making sure the next person doesn't have to go through what you went through." Marcus had never forgotten those words. Every company he acquired, every business he transformed, every policy he implemented was guided by that principle. Success was good, but justice was better. Now, watching Victoria Hammond march toward him with that familiar look of entitled outrage, Marcus realized his mother's wisdom was about to be tested in the most public way possible. Victoria Hammond planted herself in the aisle like a general claiming territory. Her cream Chanel suit was immaculate, her posture radiating the kind of authority that came from never being told no. She looked down at Marcus with the expression of someone who had found a homeless person sleeping in her bed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying across the cabin. "There's been a mistake." Marcus looked up from his tablet where he had been reviewing the quarterly reports of his newest acquisition. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a glint of curiosity. He had seen this dance before. "I don't think so," Marcus said calmly. "I'm in seat 1A. That's what my boarding pass says." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture of practiced shock. "That's impossible. I specifically requested seat 1A. I always sit in 1A. I'm Platinum Elite with over 2 million miles." She said it like she was announcing her royal lineage. "Congratulations," Marcus replied, turning back to his tablet. "I'm sure they have other excellent seats available." The casual dismissal hit Victoria like a slap. She had never been brushed off by someone she considered beneath her station, her face flushed pink beneath her carefully applied foundation. "Gregory," she snapped at her husband, who was trying to blend into the bulkhead. Tell him who we are." Gregory Hammond looked like he wanted to disappear into the aircraft's ventilation system. "Victoria, maybe we should just—" "Don't you maybe me." Victoria cut him off. "I am not sitting in some inferior seat because of a computer glitch." She turned back to Marcus, her voice rising to ensure everyone in first class could hear. "Look at him, Gregory. Does he look like he belongs in first class?" The words hung in the air like poison gas. Conversation stopped. Passengers looked up from their phones and magazines. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the ugly implication, but unwilling to intervene. Marcus felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the same fire that had burned 21 years ago on American Flight 1247. But this time was different. This time he had power. He just wasn't ready to use it yet. "Mrs. Marcus said, his voice remaining steady. "Hammond. Victoria Hammond. And you need to move. Mrs. Hammond." Marcus continued. "I paid for this seat. I was assigned this seat. I'm sitting in this seat. I suggest you speak with the flight attendant about your concerns." Victoria's eyes blazed. She had never encountered such calm defiance from someone she considered her social inferior. "Flight attendant!" She called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Jessica Martinez appeared instantly as if summoned by some invisible bell. She had been watching the interaction from the galley, hoping it would resolve itself without her involvement. But Platinum Elite passengers didn't make requests, they made demands. Mrs. Hammond Jessica said, her voice syrupy with deference. "How can I help you?" Victoria gestured at Marcus like he was a piece of misplaced luggage. "This man is in my seat. I need him moved immediately." Jessica looked at Marcus for the first time since boarding had begun. She saw the hoodie. She saw the skin color. She saw someone who didn't match her mental image of a first-class passenger. Her smile became strained. Sir Jessica said, her tone shifting from professional to patronizing. "Could I see your boarding pass and identification, please?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" "We just need to verify everything is correct," Jessica said, though she had never asked a white passenger for such verification. "There have been some issues with fraudulent bookings recently." The lie came so easily it was clearly practiced. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained level. "Issues with fraudulent bookings in first-class computer systems can be hacked," Jessica said, extending her hand. "Your ID, please." Marcus reached into his pocket and handed over his driver's license and boarding pass. Jessica snatched them with barely concealed impatience, studying them like she was examining evidence of a crime. "Marcus Rivera," she read aloud as if the name itself was suspicious. She tapped something into her handheld device. The machine beeped green. Valid. Paid in full. First-class fare $3,200. A smart employee would have stopped there. A professional employee would have apologized to Marcus and politely told Victoria that her usual seat was occupied. But Jessica wasn't smart or professional. She was prejudiced, and she was intimidated by the woman in the expensive suit. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm sure it's just a computer error. People like him usually fly with points or employee passes, or maybe someone bought him the ticket as charity." She said the word charity like it tasted bitter. Jessica nodded as if this made perfect sense. "There does seem to be a discrepancy," she lied, looking directly at Marcus. "The system is showing your ticket as standby overflow." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Standby overflow on a $3,000 ticket, computer glitches happen," Jessica said dismissively. "Mrs. Hammond has priority status. I'm going to need you to gather your things. We have a seat available in premium economy." The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus felt the same powerless rage he had experienced 2 decades earlier, but this time it was mixed with something else. This time he had options. "I'm not moving," Marcus said quietly. Victoria gasped as if he had threatened her life. "Did you hear him, Jessica? He's being aggressive." "I don't feel safe." Marcus hadn't raised his voice above a conversational volume. He hadn't made any threatening gestures. He had simply refused to be bullied out of a seat he had paid for. But in Victoria's world, any resistance from someone like him was inherently threatening. Sir Jessica said, her voice becoming sharper. "If you don't comply, I'll have to involve the captain." Marcus looked directly into her eyes. "Then call the captain, but make sure he understands exactly what's happening here. You're removing a paying first-class passenger based on the color of his skin to appease a woman with a platinum card." The cabin fell silent. The ugly truth had been spoken aloud, and nobody could pretend they hadn't heard it. Jessica's face flushed red. She pressed the call button on her communication device. "Captain Mitchell, we have a situation in first class. Passenger refusing crew instructions, requesting assistance." The war had officially begun. From her seat in 3B, Sofia Gonzalez had been watching the entire exchange with growing horror. Sofia was a civil rights attorney from Miami, and she recognized discrimination when she saw it. More importantly, she knew how to document it. She quietly pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is happening right now on Apex Airways Flight 447, she whispered into her camera. "A black passenger is being harassed for sitting in his assigned first-class seat, while a white woman demands he be removed." Within seconds, Sofia had started a live stream on Instagram. The viewer count began climbing 50, 100, 500, 1,000 people watching in real time. Marcus noticed Sofia's phone but said nothing. He had learned long ago that witnesses were valuable, especially when they had cameras. "You're making a mistake you'll remember forever," Marcus said to Jessica, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. "Is that a threat?" Jessica snapped. "It's a courtesy," Marcus replied. "I'm giving you a chance to reconsider before this goes any further." Victoria Hammond was practically vibrating with indignation. "I can't believe this. Gregory, call the airline. Call someone. This is ridiculous." But Gregory remained silent, studying Marcus with new attention. Something about the man's composure was unsettling. Most people would be angry by now. They would be shouting, causing a scene. Marcus was doing the opposite. He was getting calmer, more controlled. Gregory had worked in finance long enough to recognize the behavior of someone who held cards nobody else could see. "Mrs. Hammond," Marcus said, turning to face Victoria directly. "What exactly did I do to upset you?" "You're in my seat," Victoria said, as if this were obvious. "The seat I paid for, the seat I was assigned, the seat I'm entitled to occupy." Marcus's voice remained steady. "So what I'm really doing wrong is existing in a space you think belongs to you. That's not." Victoria started. "That's exactly what this is," Marcus interrupted. "You looked at me and decided I didn't belong here, not because I was causing trouble, not because I was being rude, but because of how I look. The cabin was dead silent now. Even the flight attendants in the galley had stopped moving to listen. "This isn't about race," Victoria protested weakly. "Then what's it about?" Marcus asked. "My hoodie, my sneakers. Or is it something else that makes you think I don't deserve to sit where I paid to sit?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She couldn't answer because the honest answer would expose exactly the kind of person she was. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With practiced movements, he opened his contacts and selected a number that very few people in the world possessed. But he didn't dial it yet. He wanted to give Jessica and Victoria one more chance to do the right thing. "Last opportunity," Marcus said quietly. "You can apologize, find Mrs. Hammond another seat, and we can all pretend this misunderstanding never happened." Jessica straightened her shoulders. "Sir, the captain is on his way. I suggest you gather your belongings and avoid making this situation worse for yourself." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood." He pressed the call button on his phone. On Sophia's live stream, the viewer count had reached 5,000 people. The comment section was exploding with outrage. "This is straight-up racism. Why isn't anyone helping him? I'm never flying Apex Airways again. Someone needs to lose their job over this." They had no idea how right they were. The cockpit door opened with a mechanical thunk that seemed to echo through the first-class cabin. Captain Ryan Mitchell emerged like a sheriff entering a saloon, his silver hair perfectly combed and his uniform crisp with authority. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who had been flying for 25 years and believed the aircraft was his personal kingdom. Mitchell didn't look at Marcus first. He didn't ask what had happened. Instead, he turned immediately to Victoria Hammond, his face arranged in an expression of professional concern mixed with barely concealed irritation. "Mrs. Hammond," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone addressing an old friend. "I'm so sorry for this disruption." "What seems to be the problem?" Victoria straightened in her seat, clearly pleased to finally be speaking with someone who understood her importance. "Captain, this man has taken my seat and is refusing to move. He's been threatening your flight attendant." Marcus hadn't threatened anyone, but Victoria delivered the lie with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted. Mitchell finally turned his attention to Marcus, and his assessment was immediate and dismissive. He saw the hoodie. He saw the dark skin. He saw a passenger who didn't match his idea of first-class clientele. His expression hardened. Sir Mitchell barked, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in aviation. "I need you to gather your belongings and come with me," Captain Marcus said, his voice remaining level despite the fire burning in his chest. "I am the rightful ticket holder for seat 1A. Your flight attendant has made false claims about my reservation to accommodate Mrs. Hammond's preference." Mitchell's face reddened slightly. He wasn't accustomed to being questioned by passengers, especially passengers who looked like Marcus. Son Mitchell said the word dripping with condescension. "I don't need to hear your side of the story. My flight crew tells me you're being disruptive and threatening. That's enough for me." The word son hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was 44 years old, a successful businessman, and the actual owner of the airline. But to Captain Mitchell, he was just another black man who needed to be put in his place. "I haven't threatened anyone," Marcus said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge that made several passengers look up from their phones. "I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. If you check your manifest, you'll see that I'm the legitimate passenger for 1A. "I don't need to check anything," Mitchell cut him off. "My flight attendant says you're causing problems, and that's good enough for me. You have 2 choices, take a seat in economy or get off the plane." Marcus felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in the same powerlessness he had experienced 21 years ago. But this time was different. This time he had weapons they couldn't see. Captain Mitchell Marcus said, his voice dropping to a register that made people unconsciously lean forward to listen. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Something in Marcus's tone made Mitchell pause for a microsecond, but his ego quickly reasserted itself. "Is that a threat?" Mitchell stepped closer, using his height to try to intimidate. "Because threatening a flight crew is a federal offense." "It's not a threat." Marcus replied, his voice now carrying a tone that seemed to drop the temperature in the cabin. "It's a courtesy. I'm giving you one chance to save your career." Mitchell's face went from red to purple. "I don't care if you're the Secretary of Transportation. You get off my plane when I tell you to get off." The irony of those words would be remembered by everyone in that cabin for the rest of their lives. Officer Mitchell called toward the front of the aircraft, where airport security had been waiting just outside the door. Sofia Gonzalez's live stream had exploded. What had started as 5,000 viewers had grown to over 15,000, and the numbers were climbing by the second. Her camera captured every word, every gesture, every moment of the unfolding drama. "You guys, this is unbelievable," Sofia whispered to her phone. "The captain just threatened a passenger who has done absolutely nothing wrong except refuse to give up his paid seat to a white woman." The comments section was moving so fast it was almost impossible to read. "This captain needs to be fired immediately." Screenshot his name badge, Ryan Mitchell. "The man in the hoodie is being so calm and dignified. Why isn't anyone helping him? This is going viral right now." A passenger in 4A had started his own recording capturing the scene from a different angle. The woman in 2B was streaming on TikTok. Even Gregory Hammond, despite his wife's fury, was discreetly recording on his phone, perhaps sensing that he was witnessing something that would become historically significant. Marcus noticed the phones but remained focused on Captain Mitchell. He had spent decades learning to control his emotions in high-stakes situations, and that training was serving him now. Captain Marcus said one more time, "I strongly advise you to reconsider this course of action. Save your advice for someone who cares," Mitchell snapped. Security. 2 airport police officers entered the cabin. They were both middle-aged men with tired eyes who had seen every kind of passenger disturbance imaginable. The first officer, whose name tag read Johnson, looked at the scene with obvious reluctance. "What's the situation?" Captain Officer Johnson asked. "Disruptive passenger refusing to follow crew instructions," Mitchell said, pointing at Marcus. "Threatening behavior. I want him removed from the aircraft." Officer Johnson looked at Marcus, who was sitting calmly with his hands visible, making no threatening gestures. The second officer, Rodriguez, seemed equally skeptical. "Sir," Officer Johnson said to Marcus, his voice more respectful than threatening, "the captain says you're being disruptive." "Can you tell me what happened? I'm sitting in the seat I paid for," Marcus said simply. "Mrs. Hammond wanted this particular seat, and the flight crew decided to accommodate her by claiming my ticket was fraudulent." Officer Johnson looked at Jessica, who was hovering nearby. "Ma'am, is his ticket valid?" Jessica hesitated for a crucial second, too long. "Well, yes, technically, but there were irregularities." "The ticket is valid or it isn't?" Rodriguez interrupted. "Which is it?" "It's valid," Jessica admitted reluctantly, "but Mrs. Hammond has priority status." "That doesn't supersede a confirmed seat assignment," Johnson said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Captain Mitchell's face was now approaching a dangerous shade of red. "Officers, I am the captain of this aircraft, and I am ordering you to remove this passenger. He is trespassing." The legal authority was technically on Mitchell's side. The captain of an aircraft had broad powers to remove passengers he deemed disruptive, even if that determination was questionable. Sir Johnson said to Marcus, his voice apologetic, "I'm afraid we need you to come with us." Marcus stood slowly. He was several inches taller than Captain Mitchell, and his calm dignity made the captain's bluster look petty by comparison. "Officer Johnson," Marcus said, reading the man's name tag, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that I never raised my voice, never made threats, never resisted. The only thing I did was exist in a seat while black." Johnson's expression showed he understood exactly what was happening, but his hands were tied by the captain's authority. "I'm sorry," Sir Johnson said quietly. "Captain's orders." Marcus nodded once, then reached for his leather bag. He moved with deliberate slowness, his dignity intact, despite the humiliation being forced upon him. "Mrs. Hammond," Marcus said, turning to Victoria one last time, "enjoy the seat. I hope it brings you everything you deserve." Victoria, still flushed with victory, couldn't resist a final jab. "Maybe next time you'll fly with an airline more suited to your budget." The cruelty of the comment made several passengers gasp audibly. Sophia's live stream chat exploded with outrage. Even Gregory Hammond looked embarrassed by his wife's behavior. Marcus smiled, then an expression that somehow managed to be both gentle and terrifying. "Mrs. Hammond," he said softly, "you have no idea what you've just cost yourself." The walk down the aisle was a gauntlet of shame designed to break Marcus's spirit. Every passenger in first-class business and economy could see him being escorted off by police. Phones came out. People whispered. Some looked sympathetic, but no one intervened. This was exactly what the removal was designed to do, send a message that people like Marcus didn't belong in spaces like this, and that resistance would be met with public humiliation. But Marcus walked with his head high. He nodded to passengers who made eye contact. He even smiled at a nervous-looking child who was staring at him with wide eyes. "It's okay," he told the child quietly as they passed. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." Officer Johnson, walking behind Marcus, felt increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. In his 15 years of airport security, he had seen real troublemakers. Marcus Rivera didn't fit the profile. Sir Johnson said quietly as they reached the jetway, "I want you to know this doesn't sit right with me." "I appreciate that, Officer Johnson," Marcus replied. "But you were just doing your job." They walked him through the jetway and into the gate area where curious travelers looked up from their phones to see what was happening. The heavy door of the aircraft closed behind them with a sound like a tomb sealing. Marcus stood in the sterile fluorescent light of Gate C-12, flanked by 2 police officers who looked like they wished they were anywhere else. The gate agent, a young man named Tommy Rodriguez, watched the scene with obvious discomfort. "Look, buddy," Officer Rodriguez said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "The captain wants a report filed, but if you just leave quietly, we won't press charges for disturbing the peace." Marcus looked at the closed door of Flight 447. Through the windows, he could see passengers settling in for departure. Victoria Hammond was probably ordering champagne in his seat right now. Officers, Marcus said calmly, "Thank you for your professionalism. You can go ahead and file whatever report Captain Mitchell requires." The officers exchanged glances. Most removed passengers either exploded in anger or slunk away in shame. Marcus was doing neither. "You sure about that?" Sir Johnson asked. "A federal charge for disrupting a flight can affect your ability to fly commercially." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm sure." He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. The direct line to Arthur Pendleton, chairman of the board of directors for Apex Airways. The man who had negotiated the sale of the company that morning. The man who had just sold his airline to Marcus Rivera. Marcus pressed dial. The phone rang twice before Arthur's familiar voice answered. "Marcus, I thought you were in the air by now. How's the inaugural flight as owner going?" The 2 police officers couldn't hear Arthur's side of the conversation, but they saw Marcus's expression change. The calm mask he had worn throughout the ordeal was replaced by something much more dangerous. Arthur Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the gate area. "We have a problem." Arthur Pendleton was sitting in his corner office, 40 floors above downtown Chicago, when his secure phone rang. As the chairman of Apex Airways' board of directors, Arthur had been fielding calls all day from investors, analysts, and reporters curious about the morning's acquisition announcement. But this call was different. This was Marcus Rivera, the man who had just purchased his airline for $4.2 billion. "Marcus, I thought you were in the air by now," Arthur said, his voice warm with the satisfaction of a man who had just closed the deal of his career. "How's the inaugural flight as owner going?" There was a pause on the other end that made Arthur's smile fade. Arthur Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone that made the chairman's blood run cold. "We have a problem. I'm standing at gate C12 at O'Hare. I was just removed from flight 447 by airport police." Arthur dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on his marble floor, sending hot liquid splashing across his Italian shoes. But he didn't notice. "What do you mean, removed?" Arthur's voice cracked like a teenager's. "Removed? How?" "Removed. Why?" "I was thrown off my own airline." "Arthur," Marcus said, his words precise and devastating, "because a white passenger wanted my seat, and your crew decided I didn't look like I belonged in first class." The silence that followed was so complete, Arthur wondered if the call had dropped. Around the gate area, passengers were starting to notice that something significant was happening. The man in the hoodie wasn't crying or ranting like most people who got kicked off flights. He was speaking in the calm, measured tones of someone conducting business. "Oh my God," Arthur finally whispered. "Marcus, they didn't know who you were. They didn't know. And they didn't care," Marcus replied. "A passenger named Victoria Hammond demanded my seat. Flight attendant Jessica Martinez fabricated claims about my ticket being fraudulent. Captain Ryan Mitchell refused to check the manifest and had me removed by police for threatening behavior." Marcus's voice grew colder with each word. "I never raised my voice, Arthur. I never made threats. I simply refused to be bullied out of a seat I paid for." Arthur was already pulling up the flight information on his computer, his hands shaking as he typed. "Marcus, I am so incredibly sorry. This is absolutely unacceptable. I'll call the station manager immediately. We'll get you on the next flight to Miami. First class, of course. No charge. And I'll personally ensure no Arthur." The finality in Marcus's voice stopped Arthur mid-sentence. "I'm not getting on another flight, and you're not calling the station manager." Marcus paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the authority of a man who owned empires. "I want you to ground flight 447. Right now." Arthur's mouth went dry. "Marcus, that flight has 180 passengers on board. It's fully loaded, fully fueled. They're probably pushing back from the gate as we speak. The cost of grounding a transatlantic flight." Arthur Marcus interrupted, read the purchase agreement we signed this morning. Section 12, subsection C. "Who has operational authority over the Apex Airways fleet as of noon today?" Arthur's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up the massive contract. He found the section, and his face went pale as he read the words he had negotiated himself just hours earlier. "Technically, you do. Rivera Capital Group assumes full operational control upon contract execution. Correct. I own this airline, Arthur. Every plane, every route, every employee. And I am giving you a direct order to ground Flight 447 immediately." Arthur looked out his office window at the Chicago skyline, knowing his career was balanced on the edge of a knife. "And then what? And then I get back on that plane and I fire every single person who touched this situation." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Arthur had worked in aviation for 30 years. He had seen passengers wrongfully removed before, usually with quiet settlements and non-disclosure agreements. But he had never seen anything like this. Marcus Arthur said carefully, "Are you sure you want to handle it this way?" "The publicity is already happening, Arthur. There are videos going viral on social media right now. The question is whether we control the narrative or let it control us. Arthur pulled up Twitter on his second monitor. Hashtag Flight447 was already trending. Videos of Marcus being escorted off the plane were everywhere with millions of views and climbing. Jesus Christ, Arthur breathed. Ground the plane, Arthur. That's an order from the owner of Apex Airways. Arthur's hands hovered over his keyboard. Grounding a flight in progress was extraordinarily expensive and would cause massive disruptions, but refusing a direct order from the company's new owner was career suicide. It's done, Arthur said, already typing the emergency ground command. I'm sending the order now. The moment Arthur Pendleton sent the ground order, Apex Airways Operations Center erupted into controlled chaos. The massive room filled with monitors, radar screens, and communication equipment suddenly blazed with red alerts. David Ross, the station manager at O'Hare, was reviewing departure schedules when his secure phone rang, with the tone that indicated an emergency from corporate headquarters. Ross here, he answered. David, this is Arthur Pendleton. I need you to listen very carefully and do exactly what I tell you. David straightened in his chair. The chairman calling directly was unusual. The chairman calling with that tone in his voice was unprecedented. Yes, sir. Flight 447 to Miami is being grounded immediately. I'm sending you the emergency recall order now. But, David, there's more. The passenger who was removed from that flight, he's Marcus Rivera. The name hit David like a physical blow. Every senior manager at Apex Airways knew about the acquisition. They knew Rivera Capital Group had purchased the airline. They knew Marcus Rivera was now their boss. Oh, God, David whispered. Sir, I had no idea. Nobody did. That was the point. He was flying incognito to observe operations. And our crew just threw the owner of the airline off his own plane for racial discrimination. David's hands started shaking. What do you need me to do? Get your best people to Gate C12 immediately. Corporate Security Legal Counsel, whoever you can find. And David, bring your resignation letter. You might need it. While David Ross was mobilizing his team, Marcus was making other calls. His first was to his executive assistant, Sarah Chen, at Rivera Capital Group headquarters. Sarah, I need you to activate Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 was Rivera Capital's crisis response plan, designed for situations where the company faced immediate reputational or legal threats. Sarah had never had to use it, but she had rehearsed it dozens of times. Activated. Sarah set her fingers already flying across her keyboard. Legal team is being assembled. PR firm is on standby. What's the situation? Racial discrimination incident on my first flight as Apex Airways owner. Videos are already viral. I'm about to ground the plane and fire the crew. Understood. Damage control or full offensive. I want this to be a teaching moment for the entire industry. Marcus's second call was to his head of security, James Morrison, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate investigations. Jim, I need a complete background check on Captain Ryan Mitchell, flight attendant Jessica Martinez, and passenger Victoria Hammond. I want to know about any previous discrimination complaints, any patterns of behavior, anything that shows this wasn't an isolated incident. How fast do you need it? Before I get back on that plane. His third call was to Rivera Capital's media team. Marcus had learned long ago that in the age of social media, controlling the narrative was everything. This is going to be big, he told his communications director. I want our statement ready before the plane lands. Frame this as accountability, not revenge. We're not destroying careers. We're building a better airline. Meanwhile, in the Apex Airways Operations Center, technicians were scrambling to understand why Flight 447 had been ordered to return to the gate. Ground control was confused. The pilots were demanding explanations. Passengers were starting to worry. But the order had come directly from the chairman with Marcus Rivera's authority behind it. There was no choice but to comply. Inside Flight 447's cockpit, Captain Ryan Mitchell was running through his final pre-flight checks when the radio crackled to life. Apex 447, this is ground control. Ground control. Apex 447, go ahead. Mitchell responded, expecting routine departure clearance. Apex 447, cancel takeoff clearance. Return to gate C12 immediately. Mitchell frowned at his instruments. Everything was green. Weather was clear. They were moments away from departure. Ground control Apex 447. Request reason for gate return. All conditions normal. Apex 447, this is a Priority 1 operational hold. Return to gate immediately. No exceptions. Mitchell's frown deepened. Priority 1 operational holds were reserved for serious emergencies, bomb threats, mechanical failures, or federal security issues. David Mitchell said to his co-pilot, "Have you ever heard a Priority 1 called on a taxiing aircraft?" Co-pilot David Park checked his instruments again. "Never, Captain. Not unless there was a bomb threat." Ground control Apex 447. Requesting clarification on nature of emergency. Apex 447 order comes directly from corporate operations. Return to gate. Acknowledge. The tone in the controller's voice brooked no argument. Mitchell felt a cold knot forming in his stomach, though he couldn't explain why. Ground control. Apex 447. Acknowledging. Returning to gate. Mitchell turned the massive aircraft around, leaving the line of departing planes. Through the cockpit windows, he could see other flights taking off into the clear Chicago sky. His flight was being singled out for some unknown emergency. In the cabin, passengers were starting to notice the unusual movement. Flight attendant Jessica Martinez tried to maintain her professional composure, but she was rattled. The confrontation with the passenger in 1A had left her shaken, and now something was obviously wrong with the flight. Victoria Hammond, now comfortably settled in seat 1A with a glass of champagne, looked up from her phone with annoyance. "What's happening now?" she demanded. "Are we going back?" Jessica forced a smile. "Just a minor issue, Mrs. Hammond. We'll have it sorted out quickly." But Jessica didn't feel confident. Something about the removed passenger's calm demeanor had unnerved her. Most people thrown off flights were angry, crying, or making threats. He had been almost eerily composed, like he knew something she didn't. As the plane taxied back toward the gate, Mitchell grabbed the PA microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell speaking. We've been asked to return to the gate for a minor administrative issue. We should have this resolved quickly and be on our way to Miami shortly. Thank you for your patience." The announcement didn't fool anyone. Passengers were pulling out phones, checking for news about flight delays, tweeting complaints about airline efficiency. They had no idea they were about to witness aviation history. Through the terminal windows, Marcus Rivera watched his plane returning to the gate. Around him, a small crowd had gathered. David Ross had arrived with 2 corporate security officers and a legal representative. Tommy Rodriguez, the gate agent, was trying to figure out what was happening. "Mr. Rivera David Ross," said his voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot express how sorry I am about this incident. It is absolutely inexcusable and does not represent the values of Apex Airways." Marcus looked at the station manager with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the ordeal. "Mr. Ross, the values of Apex Airways are exactly what I just experienced. The question is whether we're going to change those values or pretend this was an isolated incident." The jetway was extending toward the aircraft like a mechanical finger of justice. In a few minutes, Marcus would walk back onto his plane, and everyone who had humiliated him would learn exactly who they had crossed. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about sending a message to an entire industry that discrimination would no longer be tolerated even in the sky. The jetway connected to Flight 447 with a soft mechanical thud that seemed to echo through the terminal. Marcus Rivera stood at the threshold, flanked by David Ross, 2 corporate security officers, and a legal representative whose briefcase contained termination papers that had been printed during the 15 minutes it took the plane to return to the gate. Behind them, a small crowd of passengers waiting for other flights had gathered, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Several were recording with their phones. Sofia Gonzalez's live stream, still active from inside the aircraft, now had over 50,000 viewers watching in real time. Mr. Rivera David Ross said, his voice trembling slightly, "Would you like me to go first and explain the situation to the crew?" Marcus shook his head. "No. They made their choice without knowing who I was. Let's see how they handle the consequences." The door opened and Marcus stepped onto his aircraft for the second time that day. But this time, everything was different. This time, he held all the cards. The first person he saw was Tommy Rodriguez, the gate agent who had positioned himself just inside the door. Tommy's face was pale with the realization that he was witnessing something that would be talked about in airline industry circles for decades. Jessica Martinez was standing in the galley, her confident demeanor from earlier completely gone. She looked up as Marcus entered and her face went white as if she had seen a ghost. "Sir," she stammered, "you can't. The police. You were removed." Marcus didn't respond to her. He walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps deliberate and measured. Every passenger's eyes were on him. The cabin was dead silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning equipment. Captain Mitchell emerged from the cockpit, his face red with confusion and mounting anger. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Security! This passenger was removed from the aircraft. He's trespassing." David Ross stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "Captain Mitchell, this is Marcus Rivera. He's the new owner of Apex Airways." The words hit the cabin like a physical force. Several passengers gasped audibly. Gregory Hammond's phone slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. Victoria Hammond looked up from her champagne with confusion that was rapidly turning to horror. "That's impossible," Mitchell said, though his voice had lost much of its authority. "Look at him. He's wearing a hoodie." "Yes," Marcus said, speaking for the first time since returning to the aircraft. "I am wearing a hoodie. Does that change the fact that I own this airline?" "Captain Mitchell?" Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio. From it, he extracted the signed acquisition document still bearing that morning's timestamp along with his Rivera Capital Group identification. As of 12:01 p.m. today, Marcus announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the cabin. Apex Airways became a wholly owned subsidiary of Rivera Capital Group. I am Marcus Rivera, and I own this plane, this airline, and technically I own your jobs. He held up the documents for everyone to see. The corporate letterhead was unmistakable, the signatures were fresh, the legal language was clear. Victoria Hammond's champagne glass began shaking in her hand. "That can't be right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're... Black Marcus finished for her. "Yes, Mrs. Hammond. I'm black. And I'm also a billionaire who just bought an airline. Those two facts aren't mutually exclusive, despite what you might believe." Captain Mitchell was staring at the documents like they might be written in a foreign language, but you looked like what, Captain? Like someone who doesn't belong in first class. Like someone whose word doesn't matter. Like someone you can humiliate without consequences. The cabin was so quiet that passengers could hear their own heartbeats. Several were recording everything, understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed millions of times. Jessica Martinez had started crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. She had discriminated against her own boss, the man who now controlled her livelihood. "Mr. Rivera," she sobbed. "I didn't know. Mrs. Hammond, she pressured me. I was just trying to keep the peace." Marcus turned his attention to her, his expression softening slightly. "Jessica, that's exactly the problem. You were willing to humiliate me to keep her peace. You looked at me and decided I was someone who didn't matter. Someone you could bully. He gestured toward Victoria Hammond, who was now cowering in seat 1A like she was trying to disappear into the leather. You chose to believe her assumption that I didn't belong here, rather than trust that I had legitimately purchased my seat. That choice revealed something about your character, and, more importantly, it revealed something about the culture of this airline. David Ross stepped forward with his briefcase. Mr. Rivera, how would you like to proceed? Marcus looked around the cabin at the faces staring back at him. Some showed shame. Others showed fear. A few showed admiration for how he was handling the situation. First, Marcus said, I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about revenge. This is about accountability. The actions taken by your crew today were not just unprofessional, they were discriminatory, and discrimination has no place in any business I own. Marcus walked to the center of the first-class cabin, positioning himself where everyone could see him clearly. Sophia's live stream was now approaching 100,000 viewers, and the hashtag Flight447 was trending nationally. Captain Mitchell Marcus said, his voice calm, but carrying absolute authority. You made a series of decisions today without investigating the facts. You assumed I was lying about my seat assignment. You assumed I was being threatening when I was actually being threatened. And you used your authority as captain to remove a passenger based on racial bias rather than legitimate safety concerns. Mitchell's face had gone from red to gray. Mr. Rivera, There was a misunderstanding. I was just following protocol. Protocol for what? Captain. Protocol for removing black passengers when white passengers complain. Protocol for not checking the flight manifest. Protocol for ignoring federal anti-discrimination laws. Marcus pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. His own voice filled the cabin. Captain Mitchell, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Then Mitchell's voice. I don't care if you're the Secretary of Transportation. You get off my plane when I tell you to get off. The irony of those words now was devastating. Mitchell had literally thrown off the one person who actually had the authority to ground his aircraft. Captain Marcus continued effective immediately. You are terminated for cause. Gross misconduct, violation of company anti-discrimination policies, abuse of authority. Marcus turned to David Ross. David, please collect Captain Mitchell's airport security credentials, his pilot's badge, and any company property. Mitchell's hand shook as he unpinned his wings and handed over his identification. 25 years of flying gone in an instant because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. Jessica Martinez. Marcus continued, turning to the flight attendant. You fabricated claims about my ticket being fraudulent. You lied to police officers about me being threatening. And you did it all to appease a passenger's racist demands. Jessica was sobbing openly now. Please, Mr. Rivera, I have a mortgage. I have student loans. I made a mistake. You made a choice, Marcus corrected. You chose to humiliate someone you thought couldn't fight back. Character is how you treat people who can do nothing for you, Jessica. You failed that test. Effective immediately, you are also terminated for cause. Jessica collapsed into a seat, her career in aviation over at 29 years old. But Marcus wasn't finished. Mrs. Hammond, he said, turning to Victoria, who was still clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline. You are the reason this entire incident occurred. Your sense of entitlement, your racist assumptions, and your demands that I be removed from my legitimately purchased seat. Victoria tried to speak, but no words came out. She looked around desperately for support, but even her husband Gregory was avoiding eye contact. You are hereby banned for life from Apex Airways and all partner airlines. Your Platinum Elite status is revoked, your frequent flyer miles are forfeited, and you're getting off my plane right now. You can't do that, Victoria finally managed to whisper. I'm a customer. I have rights. You have the right to be treated with dignity and respect, Marcus replied. "The same rights you denied me. But you don't have the right to discriminate against other passengers in my airline." Marcus gestured to the security officers. "Please escort Mrs. Hammond off the aircraft." Victoria looked at her husband desperately. "Gregory, do something, call the lawyers." But Gregory Hammond had made his calculation. He understood exactly who Marcus Rivera was and what Rivera Capital Group represented. His wife had just declared war on a billionaire, and Gregory had no intention of going down with her ship. "Eleanor," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes, "you brought this on yourself." The betrayal hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her own husband was abandoning her in her moment of crisis. The security officers took her arms gently but firmly. "This isn't over," she screamed as they escorted her down the aisle. "I'll sue you. I'll destroy this airline." "You'll have to buy it first," Marcus replied calmly. The door closed behind Victoria Hammond with the same finality it had closed behind Marcus earlier. But this time justice was being served instead of injustice. Within 30 minutes of Marcus Rivera's return to Flight 447, the entire aviation industry was buzzing with news of the unprecedented incident. Videos of the confrontation were being shared across every social media platform, and major news outlets were picking up the story. Arthur Pendleton had called an emergency board meeting via video conference. Board members from across the country logged in to see their chairman explaining how their new CEO had been racially profiled and removed from his own airline. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said, his face grave on the conference room screen, "we are facing the biggest crisis in Apex Airways history, but also the biggest opportunity. How we handle the next 24 hours will define this company for decades to come." The response was swift and decisive. Within an hour, Apex Airways' official statement was released. Today, Apex Airways fell far short of our stated values of dignity, respect, and equal treatment for all passengers. Our new owner, Marcus Rivera, was subjected to racial discrimination and wrongfully removed from his flight by our own crew members. This behavior is unacceptable and does not represent who we are or who we aspire to be. Effective immediately, the employees involved have been terminated. We are implementing company-wide sensitivity training, revising our passenger service protocols, and creating an anonymous reporting mechanism for discrimination complaints. We are committed to ensuring that no passenger ever experiences what Mr. Rivera endured today. The statement was shared over 1 million times within the first hour. Meanwhile, Marcus had called for replacement crew members. Captain Susan Chen, a veteran pilot with an impeccable service record, was brought in to replace Mitchell. Flight attendant Maria Santos, known for her exceptional customer service, replaced Jessica Martinez. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced to the cabin over the PA equipment, "I apologize for the delay. We will be departing for Miami shortly with a new crew who understand that every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." The passengers burst into spontaneous applause. Several called out, "Thank you, and about time." As Flight 447 finally took off for Miami, 2 hours behind schedule, the consequences of the day's events were already rippling outward. Captain Ryan Mitchell sat in his car in the airport parking garage, staring at his terminated ID badge, 25 years of flying reduced to a piece of plastic in his palm. His phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. His pension was gone. His reputation in the aviation industry was destroyed. Every major airline would know his name within hours, and none would hire him. At 48 years old, his flying career was over. But more than that, Mitchell was forced to confront something about himself he had never wanted to acknowledge. He had looked at Marcus Rivera and made assumptions based on skin color and clothing. He had used his authority to humiliate someone who had done nothing wrong, and now the whole world knew it. Jessica Martinez was driving home in tears, her career in aviation finished at 29. She had student loans to pay rent due next week and no job prospects in the only industry she had ever known. But worse than the financial consequences was the realization of what she had become. She had grown up in a working-class Hispanic family knowing what discrimination felt like. Yet when given the choice between standing up for what was right and appeasing a wealthy white woman, she had chosen wrong. The videos of her fabricating claims about Marcus's ticket would follow her forever. Victoria Hammond's consequences were different but equally severe. By the time she arrived home to her suburban mansion, her phone was flooded with calls from reporters and angry messages from friends who had seen the videos. Her country club had already called to discuss her membership status. Her husband Gregory had moved into the guest bedroom and was consulting divorce attorneys. But perhaps most shocking to Victoria was the realization that in her privileged world there were still consequences for her actions. For the first time in her 52 years, being wealthy and white hadn't protected her from accountability. The remainder of Flight 447 to Miami was unlike any commercial flight in aviation history. Captain Chen's professionalism was impeccable, and flight attendant Santos treated every passenger with equal respect and courtesy. But the real magic happened in the cabin. Marcus Rivera, instead of retreating to his seat in anger, spent the flight talking with other passengers. He learned about their lives, their businesses, their families. He listened to their own stories of discrimination and bias. An elderly black woman in 3C told him about being questioned in first class even though she was a retired federal judge. A young Hispanic businessman shared his experience of being asked to show identification multiple times on a single flight. An Asian American tech entrepreneur described being assumed to be in the wrong section despite holding a valid boarding pass. "This isn't just about me," Marcus realized aloud. "This is about all of us who have been told we don't belong somewhere we paid to be." Sofia Gonzalez, the attorney who had live-streamed the incident, approached Marcus near the end of the flight. "Mr. Rivera, I want you to know that your response today has inspired me. I'm going to start a legal clinic specifically for passengers who experience discrimination in air travel." Marcus smiled. "Send me the details. Rivera Capital Group would be interested in providing funding." As the plane descended toward Miami, Marcus made another announcement over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, today, you witnessed something that should never happen in America. A paying passenger was removed from his seat because someone decided he didn't look like he belonged. But you also witnessed something powerful: accountability. I want you to remember this flight not as a story of discrimination, but as a moment when discrimination was met with immediate consequences. When we document injustice, when we speak up for each other, when we demand better, we can change entire industries." The cabin erupted in applause again, but this time it felt different. It felt like hope. Marcus Rivera stood in the same gate area at Chicago O'Hare where he had been humiliated 6 months earlier. But everything had changed. The gate was now named the Rivera Equality Gate, and a plaque on the wall read, "In recognition of the courage to stand up for dignity and the wisdom to transform an industry." Apex Airways had become the most trusted airline in America. Customer satisfaction scores were at record highs. Employee morale had skyrocketed, and most importantly, discrimination complaints had dropped to nearly zero across the entire industry as other airlines scrambled to avoid becoming the next viral story. The changes Marcus implemented were comprehensive. Every Apex Airways employee now completed mandatory respect and inclusion training. Anonymous reporting systems allowed passengers and crew to report bias incidents instantly. Diverse hiring practices ensured that airline staff reflected the customers they served. But the most significant change was cultural. The Rivera Standard had become shorthand throughout the aviation industry for treating every passenger with dignity regardless of appearance, race, or perceived social status. Captain Susan Chen, who had replaced Mitchell on that historic flight, was now Apex Airways' chief pilot. Under her leadership, the airline had achieved the best safety record in the industry while maintaining the highest customer service standards. Flight attendant Maria Santos had been promoted to head of cabin service training, where she taught new employees that respect wasn't just policy, it was the foundation of everything they did. Sofia Gonzalez had indeed started her legal clinic funded by Rivera Capital Group. The Flight 447 Legal Foundation had handled over 200 cases of airline discrimination, winning settlements and policy changes across multiple carriers. Marcus never flew first class anonymously again, not because he wanted special treatment, but because his presence had become a powerful symbol. Passengers would approach him to share their own stories, to thank him for what he had done, to tell him how the industry had changed. But the most meaningful moment came during a flight to Atlanta 6 months after the incident. A young black businessman, maybe 25 years old, was sitting in first class when a white passenger questioned whether he belonged there. Before the flight crew could even respond, other passengers intervened. "Sir," said an older white woman, "that young man paid for his seat just like you did. I suggest you focus on your own business." A Hispanic businessman added, "We all saw what happened to the last person who tried this nonsense. Maybe you missed it. It was only the most viral airline video in history." The complaining passenger sat down and said nothing else for the entire flight. Marcus, watching from across the aisle, felt tears in his eyes. This was what real change looked like. Not just new policies or training programs, but ordinary people refusing to tolerate discrimination when they saw it. After landing, the young businessman approached Marcus. "Mr. Rivera, I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you did, but for how you did it. You didn't just get revenge. You made it better for all of us." As Marcus reflected on the journey from that humiliating day at O'Hare to the transformation of an entire industry, he realized that the story was bigger than him, bigger than Apex Airways, bigger than aviation itself. It was about the power that comes from documenting injustice. Sofia's live stream had turned a private humiliation into a public reckoning. Without those phones recording, without social media spreading the story, the incident might have been buried in paperwork and legal settlements. It was about the courage to stand up, even when you're outnumbered. Marcus could have accepted the seat in economy, could have filed a quiet complaint later, could have avoided the confrontation. Instead, he maintained his dignity and demanded better. But most importantly, it was about using power responsibly. Marcus could have simply destroyed the careers of everyone involved and moved on. Instead, he used the moment to create lasting change that would protect countless future passengers. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, remember Flight 447, Marcus said in interviews that followed. Remember that your dignity matters. Your presence in spaces where you've paid to be is not a privilege, it's a right. And when that right is violated, the whole world is watching now. The story of Flight 447 became required reading in business schools, taught as a case study in crisis management, corporate responsibility, and social justice. But beyond the academic analysis, it remained a deeply human story about respect, courage, and the possibility of transformation. 3 years later, Marcus Rivera was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year, not just for building a business empire, but for showing that true power lies not in dominance, but in dignity. The magazine's cover showed him sitting in airplane seat 1A, wearing the same gray hoodie he had worn that day with the caption, "The Man Who Changed How We Fly." In his acceptance speech, Marcus said simply, "That seat was never about the seat. It was about the principle that everyone deserves respect." Today, because ordinary people refuse to look away when injustice happened, millions of travelers fly with more dignity. That's not my victory, that's ours. And in airports across America, in first-class cabins and economy rows alike, passengers traveled knowing that someone had stood up for their right to be there. The legacy of Flight 447 wasn't just about one man's courage. It was about an entire society deciding that discrimination in the skies would no longer fly. If this story moved you, I want you to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and ensures more people see stories like this. Second, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos about justice, courage, and standing up for what's right. And third, share this story. Not just to spread awareness, but to remind others that quiet dignity can change everything. Tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed discrimination like this? How did it make you feel? And what would you have done if you were on that flight? Your stories matter, and they inspire others to speak up when it counts. Remember, when we document injustice, when we stand up for each other, when we demand better, we don't just change companies, we change the world. Until next time, stay strong, stay dignified, and never underestimate the power of doing what's right.